So guys, this is the agenda slide, and these are the topics that I'll be covering in today's session, okay? And this will be the order in which I'll be covering them. For those of you who are new to data warehousing, I will give you a quick brief about data warehousing, and I'll talk about what a data warehouse is. I'll talk about the data warehousing architecture in detail, and then I'll immediately go to the different concepts involved. So the important concepts that are there are what OLAP is. So OLAP stands for Online Analytical Processing, and I'll talk about OLAP in detail, and then I'll talk about the various OLAP cubes that we will usually work on, right? So any company or anyone working on a data warehouse, the different OLAP cubes that they work on. So I'll talk about these things, and after that, I'll talk about dimensions, facts, and measures. So these three topics are interrelated. So I'll talk about them in one segment, and the final segment of today's session is going to be about schemas. All right. So these will be the 3 or 4 different topics that I'll be covering in today's session. So guys, any doubts here? Are you guys fine with the agenda? And I hope everyone can hear my voice and see my screen. So guys, if that's the case, please put your acknowledgements in the chat box. And if you have any doubts during the session, please put them also in the chat box, and I'll get back to you at the earliest. All right. So can I get a quick yes from everyone? All right. Great. So have a couple of yeses from here. All right, Anita is saying yes, Nofil is saying yes. All right, great. And Akbar is saying yes. All right, guys. So let's get started then. First of all, what is data warehousing? Okay, let's understand what a data warehouse is, what data warehousing does, and why it's needed, and what are the added benefits, right? So what is a data warehouse? A data warehouse is like a relational database designed for analytical needs. So you guys might all be aware of what a database is, right? So you have your database where you'll be storing large amounts of data, right? You'll be storing either in your database or even in the form of flat files, okay? But flat files like Excel or something cannot be used for storing large amounts of data. There's a limit on how much you can store in an Excel, right? So that is the case where you store data in some kind of database. So example of a few databases are those of Oracle, MySQL, Microsoft SQL Server, all these things. So you have all these databases, you'll store large amounts of data, okay? But the problem is they cannot be used for analytical purposes. So that is why we have to convert or get the data inside a database, get that inside a data warehouse, and when it's inside the data warehouse, then we can perform analysis. Now that's the advantage. So the data that once has come into the data warehouse can be used for analysis, for visualization, all these things, because you can look at the data from a different angle. Because the data that comes into the data warehouse is more of an information rather than just data, right? So what you have here is just data which you can probably view, and you can write data into these places, and you can just view it from a high level, okay? You can view it from the level of every transaction that happens. So every time a sale happens, then the entire table there or the entire database will get updated, okay? All that will happen. But then when you want to perform analysis like what happened on this day and how many products were sold during this period of time, all these things cannot be gained from a database, right? So that's why we need to put them all inside a data warehouse, and once it's here, we can perform these kind of analysis and get insights from the data warehouse. And of course, inside a data warehouse, your all your end users, your business analysts, your data analysts, they can all use it for analysis and visualization, right? So that's the thing about a data warehouse, and that's the use of a data warehouse. And it functions on the basis of OLAP, right? So I told you OLAP stands for Online Analytical Processing. So the whole process of doing analysis or running queries on a data warehouse, right? It's done on the basis of online analytical processing, right? So that's one of the activities that is done. So if you're running any kind of queries on the database, then it will be called as OLTP, Online Transaction Processing. But any kind of activity or querying and all these things, when it happens in data warehouse, it's called OLAP. So that's what an OLAP is, guys. And yeah, basically it's a central location where consolidated data from multiple locations are stored. So you get data in here from multiple locations, from multiple sources. You can get it from 1 or 2 databases. You can get it from 1 or 2 flat files. You can get all this data as long as you are putting it inside the same table or inside the same columns and dimensions. Then you'll be fine, because you can get any amounts of data from any source, and you can get them all and store them all inside your data warehouse. So is that all about data warehouse? Is data warehouse so simple? Can we just simply get the data in from a database and get it into a data warehouse and then perform analysis? Is such a thing so simple? Is that can be the question on your minds? Okay. Does anyone here has that kind of a doubt? If you guys have that doubt, please raise your hands, guys. There's an option on the right side of your panel. There's an option to raise your hands. So I mean, you're supposed to get that kind of a doubt, and it's a very valid question, right? Because it looks so simple from the outside, but is it that simple? Yes, okay, I see a couple of hands raised from Akbar, and I see a hand raised by Anita. All right, so yeah, that's the thing, okay? It's not that simple. Now let's see what are the other activities that are involved in this whole process of converting data inside the database, converting it into an information, and storing that into a data warehouse, and then performing analysis, right? So these are the entire set of activities that are involved, okay? Now you can also consider this to be the data warehousing architecture. Now, before I explain all the activities and all the different stages that are there in this data warehousing architecture, let me first of all go to the definition, okay? So this whole act is called as data warehousing, all right? And data warehousing is the act of organizing and storing data in a way so as to make its retrieval efficient and insightful, okay? So this is the key terms here, to make its retrieval efficient and insightful. So you organize the data and you store the data in a data warehouse in a way you can access the data at a later point of time, and that kind of an access should be easy. You should be in an efficient way. You should be able to retrieve that data, and there should be a meaning out of that data. It should not be the same data that you store inside your database. Okay, so inside a database is the data that you collect. So you collect data and you store it inside a database. Okay, but the data that you get from a data warehouse should not be the same. So it should serve some purpose. It should have a meaning, and it should be for your benefit. So that's the whole point of a data warehouse. So that's the difference between a data warehouse and a database. All right. And a data warehousing is also called as a process of transforming data into information. Okay. So relevant data or more processed data, that is also called as information. So that's what is stored inside a data warehouse. And there's a lot of difference between the data stored in a data warehouse and the data that is stored inside a database. All right. So that is the thing. Now, speaking about the architecture, and I mean, let me explain the diagram here first of all. So you have your data inside your different data sources, right? It can be a database or a flat file, and that data should first of all be transferred into the data warehouse. But how was it done? There's an intermediate stage here that's called the staging area. Okay, the place where the data is stored, that is called the staging database. Okay, now this is a temporary storage. It's not going to be there for long. It's a very temporary storage. And the act of getting the data from here to your staging area is done through the process of ETL. Okay, so ETL here stands for extract, transform, and load. Okay, and once it comes into the temporary storage, again the process of ETL is used to transfer the data inside the data warehouse. All right, so once the data is inside your data warehouse, it's not just your data that's going to be here. Okay, it's going to be categorized and it's going to be divided. So you can think of these three things mainly. So you'll have your raw data, you will have your metadata, and you will have your aggregate data. Okay, so first of all, your raw data is the rows or columns or the actual data that's being transferred. Okay, so this makes up the chunk of the data. Okay, but metadata is the most important aspect which powers a data warehouse and which differentiates between a database and a data warehouse. Why? Because metadata is something that's going to give you data about your raw data. So whatever rows that are there in your data warehouse, or whatever information that is there inside your data warehouse, right? So information about that particular data will be stored inside your metadata. So you'll have data about which are the different tables that are there in your data warehouse, what each table does, and what kind of attributes are there inside each table, what kind of information, what will be the data type of the data present in each of those attributes. So all these things will be controlled and governed by metadata, right? So without your metadata, your data warehouse is basically useless. And metadata is the so anyone who's working on a data warehouse, right, they will tell you that metadata is what differentiates everything. That's what makes their life simpler, and that's what is actually the difference between a database and a data warehouse, right? So this serves the whole purpose and the whole difference between the two. So that, and then you have aggregate data, right? So all these three things together, they form the data warehouse. And then once your data is inside your data warehouse, your end users can use this data to perform analysis. So how do they do it? They run queries. Okay, so you have user groups here and they perform queries. Okay, now the act of performing queries on your data warehouse is called online analytical processing. Okay, that's the OLAP. Okay, so such queries are called